So it looks like we've had a few folks join us, so let's go ahead and jump in. So welcome to the San Diego Mesa College Community Forum. This is our October 13th forum, which is kind of amazing that we're already in the midst of harvest season. So amazing that we're moving along so quickly into the fall semester. Literally, autumn is upon us. And I just want to say, excited to have everybody here. And thanks all of you for posting in chat saying hi to folks, because that's really what this community forum is about. It's a way for us, since we're not physically together on campus, to really be able to talk to each other and to share the good work of the college that's moving forward, despite us not being in spaces together. So I'm really looking forward to our classified calling into action today. And I also just want to give you just a couple of updates if I could. So as you all know, we are, we're going to approach here the middle of the semester pretty soon. Our second 8-week session just started. We have more students that are joining us. So really happy to have that. Also exciting is that Mesa College will be hosting the San Diego Community College District Board meeting in November. City College just had their meeting last week, and so we will be hosting the board, and I'm going to try to get this right. I'm going to say it is November the 12th, and I'm hoping Beth will back me up on that. Okay, I might be wrong. Nope, it's the 12th, November the 12th. And so even though, again, we won't be on campus because, we do a great job on campus when we have the board meetings, but we will be having it remotely. We'll be focusing in on the opportunity to let the board know where we are in terms of our work around anti-Blackness and racial equity. And the group that's presenting today doesn't know it yet, but we're going to probably ask them to be lumping into that too, because we'd love to have them share their work with the board. But also we'll be talking to them about the Mesa 2030 plan and where we are right now with our future planning. And the way that we're going to do that is look at some of the preliminary goals that we're looking at for the institution and talk about what it would look like if we were to achieve those goals. What would the impact on students be between now and 2030? And so we're excited to be able to share that. So with that, I am just going to go ahead and turn things over to our wonderful classified professionals. And I believe Trina Larson is going to kick us off today. So Trina, it's all yours.
Here we go. Welcome everyone. On behalf of Anda McComb, Carla Grassini-Concha, Cloris Johnson, Eva Parrill, Lakita Platts, and me, Trina Larson, thank you for being here today. We represent the Classified Equity Task Force, a group that was formed at the request of Classified following an equity retreat in January 2017 that was presented by Frank Harris and Luke Wood around food insecurity. That summer, the task force came together by way of sessions at ClassiCon. The work of the task force is to develop programming that reflects upon the experiences of Classified around equity and investigates our interconnected role as equity change agents for students in the space of education, or as Paulo Freire says of it, the practices of freedom. Next slide. The Classified Equity Task Force was moved by the State Chancellor's call to action in June, which was prompted by the continued demonstration of the threat to Black lives in the U.S., in particular through the lives and deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others. To begin our portion of the forum today, we'd like to walk back to what we heard at that call to action and bring it into this space today. So we'll go ahead and play a 5-minute video.
The killing of Mr. Floyd reminds us that long before the COVID-19 pandemic, we had another epidemic in this nation. The legally sanctioned and systematically structured brutality and destruction of Black people, of Black bodies, of people of the African diaspora. And each outbreak of this epidemic, which is often started by being Black and walking, or bird watching, or selling a single cigarette, or studying, or being Black while driving, or napping, or barbecuing, or being Black while drinking water, or drinking coffee, or renting an Airbnb, or being Black while vacationing and jogging, or walking home with Skittles, and being Black while having a car breakdown, or shopping, or using too many coupons, or being Black while cutting the grass and selling hot dogs, or selling water, or selling lemonade, or playing golf, or working late, or going to work, or coming home from work, or being Black while sleeping in your own bed, or playing on the playground, or swimming in a pool, or being Black while playing a video game. You see, it can go on and on and on. So what are we in the California Community Colleges in service of that community and as a part of the community prepared to do? Host salons. Right now would be a virtual salon, but host salons in order to engage these and strategize these around how to be an anti-racist. And the next thing is be an anti-racist and make yourself smart about what that means and how you can be an anti-racist. Educate yourself and your friends and your loved ones about the reality of Black existence. Listen without judgment to people who are expressing their pain, even if that pain is expressed in a voice or an intonation or a cadence or an accent or a vernacular that you are unaccustomed to hearing or you are unaccustomed to valuing. Develop a greater sense of consciousness and racial literacy and understand that the value of your comfort is not greater than the value of the Black life that is making you uncomfortable.
We are the anti-racist arm of higher ed. And I think what's so important for us right now as leaders is to create space. We can listen to understand. We can enter spaces with humility and vulnerability, because there shouldn't be in the rank in the room when you're trying to learn together.
Thank you, Pam. I just want to uplift something that you highlighted. We said we were going to start by listening and learning and acting. And something that you said is something that I want to elevate. You said there shouldn't be any ranks in the room when we are all trying to learn. I'm watching the Q&A chat box and I'm seeing a lot of comments, and I want you to hear Dr. Pamela Luster. There shouldn't be any ranks in the room when we are trying to learn. This next speaker, you've got to get up. I am so excited to hear from Dr. Abdul Malik Poole, Assistant Professor of Counseling and Transfer Center Director at San Diego City College.
Now more than ever, we have to focus on why we're pushing for equity, because the opposite has been inequity and injustice. Why we're calling for inclusion, because the opposite has been exclusion and oppression. And diversity, we talked about all the different marginalized communities. We call for diversity because the opposite has been explicit and implicit racism of the fear of that diversity. We need classy, classified professionals who engage our students with the highest level of dignity and respect, from financial aid to admissions and records, explaining, meeting their humanity at their doors, whether it be virtual or in person. Now is not the time to water it down, brothers and sisters. Now it's time to double down. Now it's time to double down. Now it's time to go beyond the optics, beyond the symbolism, and get to action. Because 400 years plus we've been waiting for action. 400 years plus Black folks have been on the front lines of civil rights and integration and voting rights. And what has that led to us? More hashtags after more hashtags after more hashtags. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, as Fannie Lou Hamer says. To pivot, as the chancellor said, from compliance to empowerment. From theory to action. We're academics. Let's get out of our head and into our souls, into our spirit, into the depths of who we are as humans, and transform this energy that has been co-opted, like the protests, like has been co-opted, like these buzzwords. And let's move this from a moment to a movement. And we have the system to do that. Ashe. Thank you.
On June 3rd, we were called to recognize that community colleges are the anti-racist arm of higher education, and that there are no hierarchies in spaces where we are learning together. Thank you, President Pam. We heard from Dr. Regina Stanbeck-Stroud that this is a time to act, in part by creating forums to investigate our systems and ourselves. We were inspired by Dr. Abdimalik Boole that this is the time to lend our voices to transform a moment into a movement. Because classified professionals have a unique relationship with students and to the institution, we felt and we feel we have a unique role to play in remaking our world and our consciousness, starting from where we stand at this historic time. We hold faith with the act of taking a next step, and we do so behind those who have taken truly dangerous steps to move us all closer to our promise. Next slide, please.
With support from the Loft, Classified Professional Learning Committee, and college leadership, we inaugurated our Next Step sessions in August. We meet on the second Tuesdays of the month from 10 to 11 and on the fourth Thursdays from 2 to 3. Next slide. In hosting these sessions, we lean into the idea that we don't need to see the whole staircase, just the next step. As Martin Luther King Jr. put it, and so our leadership is distributed. We develop our conversations and learning organically, and we pause at each session to consider and consent to each discussion. Next slide, please. You're up, Anda.
Thank you, Carla. And as we begin every session, we try to put at the forefront our purpose, which is to bear witness to, identify, and respond to historic and structural racism and other forms of systemic oppression that we are challenged to end through the lens of classified professionals from where we stand. Now I'll hand it over to Lakita to discuss a network of mutuality.
In knowing our why, we are able to embrace a famous quote from Martin Luther King Jr.'s 1963 letter from Birmingham jail. The letter was written as a response to clergymen speaking out against the protests, but failing to express a similar concern for the conditions that brought about the protests. The quote reads, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." And he signs off, "Yours for the cause of peace and brotherhood, Martin Luther King Jr." This quote also reminds me of the essential-led student groups that are taking place here at Mesa entitled Propelled by Protests. I am thankful for the program facilitators of the student-led discussions and our leadership for allowing these events to take place. And I think we all agree student voices are the primary piece in our community. Eva will now share our community agreements.
So to create a space for challenging conversations in which we unpack social justice topics, we affirm these agreements at the start of each session. We ask everybody to be present, that messy is okay, that productive struggle is valuable. We assume good intentions. We give everyone a chance to speak. We speak from the I or address the topic, not the person. When possible, we call in, not out. We are patient with technology. We give ourselves space to soften this inner critic. We say ouch when something heard doesn't feel good, and we're open to hear and say oops, and allow ourselves to be sorry and mean it without harmful self-criticism. So what's said there stays there, what's learned leaves, and we carry action items forward.
Over the last 9 weeks, we've been led by members of our very own classified professional community here at Mesa. Today, we'll be going over some of the topics we have discussed, like unconscious bias, microaggressions, the importance of self-care in recharging our own energy to continue doing the work, our own privilege, how we can be allies, accomplices, anti-racist, and what that looks like. After visiting these topics, we'll have a brief Q&A, time permitting. And also just at the end of each of our sessions, we propose what we'll discuss at the next session, and we request a volunteer to lead it. We revisit that proposal before beginning the next time to affirm our consensus and leave room for more urgent or necessary conversations. Next slide, please.
You're muted, Ms. Cloris.
I'm sorry. So, classified professionals wanted to discuss self-care as one of our topics. Self-care is any activity that we deliberately do in order to take care of our mental, emotional, and physical health. On top of everything else, we are currently dealing with the pandemic, racial tensions, a huge election, working from home, some of us with distance learners, keep us in your prayers. And we understand that this is a tough time. During our meeting, we gave self-care tips and resources for classified professionals. Regarding self-care, one of the questions we asked is, are there any changes you would like to make internally and or externally? What steps will you take to get there? We recognize that incorporating daily self-care activities helps reduce stress and anxiety. It also strengthens our mental health and well-being. We will want to be healthy and happy employees. Next slide, please. So unconscious bias is one of my favorites. We talked about it during convocation, and unconscious biases are learned stereotypes that are automatic, unintentional, deeply ingrained, universal, and able to influence behavior. When I read about unconscious biases, the first thing that came to mind was, how do you fix something that you're not aware of? During our meeting, we presented an unconscious bias test. Everyone on the call took the test and reported the results at the next meeting. What we found is we all have unconscious biases. And the first step is to acknowledge what those biases are. How can you fix what you won't admit? As you know, the Equity Task Force is all about action. So we would like to challenge everyone to walk boldly towards your biases and counteract them by doing the following. Identify your biases. And as I explained before, we have implicit association tests that you can take to find out what those biases are. Pay attention to language. Sometimes it's not about what you say, it's about how you say it. But then again, sometimes it could be what you say. So the next thing is question your thinking and challenge your assumptions. Flip the script. Would you draw the same conclusion if the scenario involves someone of a different gender or a different race? Make friends. Diversify your friendships. Your friends shouldn't look exactly like you and think exactly like you. There should be diversity within your friendships. Speak out. So when I say speak out, I think a lot of times we think combative, and that's not the case. It brought me back to when I was about 15 years old. I was using a word incorrectly. And finally, my big sister said, that is inappropriate. And let me tell you why. And so now, every time I think of it, I always think, oh, you are not supposed to say that. So I've never said it again. So it's okay to educate someone, and we don't have to think of it as a negative or combative. The next thing is don't be defensive. And so in that case, I could have been defensive, but I feel like she was doing me a service by teaching me something that I didn't know. And now I know to never do it again. Avoid generalizations and use visualization. Imagine positive images of groups that you tend to be biased to. Listen to someone else's story. We want to show empathy to our colleagues, to our friends, to people in general. And the last thing is to raise your children to embrace diversity and equality. It all starts with us. Many of our behaviors are learned, they are conscious and unconscious. So next will be Eva to discuss her test results.
Yeah, thank you, Cloris. Yeah, like you said, in our discussion about unconscious bias, we asked people to take at least one implicit bias test. And those are developed by psychologists at Harvard, University of Virginia, and University of Washington. So if you're not familiar, those tests are designed to help people understand their unconscious bias. There's about a dozen tests available, so you can test your biases related to race, skin tone, age, or religion. Most people are positively biased towards people who look like them and negatively biased against people who don't look like them. So for example, I took the test and I was thinking, I studied sociology, I work in the professional learning department, and I've gone to all these equity presentations, but I was still kind of surprised when I saw my results that I still have implicit bias towards white people. And a lot of people in the room that day were saying that they had similar results. So even if you've studied and you've kind of put that work in to understand racism, there's still work to be done. And the idea that the implicit bias test is that when you're aware of your unconscious bias, you can notice it in the moment when it happens. Then you become more aware of these unconscious thoughts and you can pause and understand and question why you feel that way. And then you can start to change those thoughts and possibly, you know, if you're exhibiting behaviors based on those unconscious thoughts, you're not having behaviors based on unconscious impulses. Next slide, please, Anda.
Thank you, Eva. In another session, we found very important to discuss the topic of microaggressions. And the reason being is that these acts are likely to be unconscious or unintentional. And some would argue that when someone is acting in a microaggressive way, it's because of years of assimilated or learned assumptions that they haven't got yet to question, but nevertheless, they act upon them. And so having awareness of all these ways people engage in microaggressions gives us a chance to stop in our tracks before we contribute to the harm of another person, or be able to be brave enough to step up and speak up on behalf of a person who is being microaggressed. On that note, I'll hand it over to Lakita to discuss speaking out in uncomfortable situations, or as I would like to call it, showing authentic leadership by being willing to stand alone.
Thank you, Anda. During our discussion on speaking up in uncomfortable situations, I shared this video of a white male using his voice to speak up in an uncomfortable situation, but also at a professional event. So let's take a look at that.
Some time ago, I was speaking at a corporate event in America. I was the guest speaker. That night at dinner, I was at a table full of white people, and the guy, one of the bosses who'd invited me, actually started to tell a joke that I knew straight away was going to be racial. And black people were going to be the butt of the joke. In those split seconds, in the early sentences of the joke, I had a decision to make. Do I say something or stay quiet? No one else was saying anything, though I'm sure they felt uncomfortable. So I spoke up and I said, I don't think this joke is one I want to hear. I don't like the way it's going. I think it's going to be at the expense of black people. I'm not comfortable with that. Would you mind not telling it? Or I could leave the table. It was very uncomfortable. I remember he didn't tell the joke, but it was uncomfortable the rest of the night. Later in my room, I journaled what I felt about what's going on. I thought two things were at play. One was what I would call white solidarity. The other was what I would call white social capital. White solidarity is an unspoken code, I think, that we have as white people that means we would never embarrass each other by creating a racial discomfort for each other, by interrupting a racist joke or pointing out a act of prejudice or discrimination. We kind of keep quiet because it's a social code that we have, that we would remain in solidarity with each other, which protects our whiteness, our white advantage, our white privilege. That was at play at the table that night that allowed him to do what he'd done obviously many times. White social capital is what you get if you stay quiet. You get included, you are one of the boys, you are an insider, you are good to be around, you're a team player, you're fun, which may give you opportunities of inclusion as well in a corporate setting, a business setting, a social setting. It is an accruing of white capital by going along with it. I want to say to my white friends listening to this that our silence at those times is not benign, it is malignant, because we become complicit in the continuation of the racist joke telling. It gets told again and again because when we heard it, we didn't say anything. And as socially awkward as it is, and knowing you'll be penalized if you say something, I'm appealing to us because millions of us every day have this opportunity to say something, to speak up, to stand up for people of color and black people. And you will be excluded and you will lose social capital, but you will be a champion of a cause that you wish someone had been for you at times in your life. And I think many of us feel we can't do anything at the large government level. We can't protest on the streets. We don't feel comfortable with this or that. Can you say something today, wherever you are in your life? Can you speak up? Because our silence is not benign. It is continuing the problem. We can all play a part like this every single day. Let's speak up. Let's play our part, is what I'm appealing for. Love you guys. Thank you.
So when I first attended our first meeting for Classified Calling into Action, I shared how I was in a space of learning to stay in love with my Blackness. I wanted to share that because I wanted it to be clear that I'm taking responsibility to not only take action, but to learn and not wanting for someone to teach me or not waiting for someone to teach me. I was being vulnerable and I knew what that meant. That meant I was being brave as well. This reminds me of hearing Brene Brown share a story of watching her daughter walk to the car with her boyfriend. They were on their way to senior prom and she began to feel vulnerable. So in her mind, she immediately her reaction was to think about the car crashing. And so she began to yell out, I'm grateful, I'm grateful, I'm grateful to be a part of this process. And that was her reaction to feeling vulnerable. And of course, her husband and son thought she was going crazy, right? So I recently tried one of Brene Brown's methods for gratitude. And I recalled what she calls a picture memory. And in my picture memory, it was similar to what Brene Brown's was because it involved my kids as well, but it was a proud mom moment. My picture memory was at a venue about the size of our San Diego Convention Center. And my daughter was competing in a volleyball match. She had just played great against a team called Coast, very competitive. And me and my husband, we were on a high. So me and my husband, we began to walk away and we told the kids, stay at the court, we'll be back. As we were returning to the court, I noticed my son speaking to a couple, a white female male couple, and my daughter is sitting next to him. But it was in this very moment, my 17-year-old son had to use his voice to explain why he was not going to give up his seat at the volleyball court. Mind you, the court had plenty of open seats. Another picture memory was my daughter recently happened to leave her classroom because there was disrespectful behavior going on. And although these were proud mom moments, they also included fear. And the fear was my kids using their voice could also be caught risking their lives. And even though if they remain silent, it doesn't change the risk. So I ask myself often, do we let racism control us? I'm reading a book right now called Teaching to Transgress, Education as a Practice of Freedom. And in the chapter, Essentialism and Experience, I'm realizing how important it is to resist the urge to fit in. Brené Brown defines fitting in as assessing and acclimating, which is the opposite of belonging. True belonging requires you to be who you are. So in the Essentialism and Experience chapter, Hooks talks about teaching in institutions where the voice of the professor is the privileged transmitter of knowledge, and how Hooks' pedagogy strategically is rooted in the assumption that we all bring to the classroom experimental knowledge that can indeed enhance our learning experience, but we cannot contribute to learning if we don't speak up. So just how the video speaks on white solidarity and white social capital, another chapter in Hooks' book, she breaks down the history of the white female, black female relationship and how they communicate and interact with each other involving the feminist movement. Hooks explains how in order for us to understand contemporary relations, we must explore the history of what she calls the servant-served relationship. She also speaks on whiteness and how white women don't want to jeopardize their social status. And for Black women, it was a fear that their resources would be appropriated by white women that led them to withdraw from the feminist conversations. But this chapter is so beautifully written because it ends with, in spite of our history, we can use our voice to engage in difficult conversations. How do we do that? We approach them with knowledge of racism, not with guilt, shame, or fear. So to end, we all have a part to play in the call to action. So I share this from the remix of the book Stamped. The authors Kendi and Reynolds answer the question, what's the problem with being not racist? Right? Not a big deal. In a moment, Anda will help us understand why neutrality is not the answer to this question. But for now, Carla will share what we discussed about becoming an ally. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Lakita. That video was very powerful when you showed it at that first session, so I appreciate you being able to share that again. On the topic of becoming an ally, we discussed what being an anti-racist ally or accomplice looks like. How do we become people that work against and call out injustices? And this will look different for all of us. The definition of ally is someone who stands with or advocates for individuals and groups other than their own. We took the time and reflected on our own privileges and experiences and expanded the discussion into the idea of social allies, which are members of dominant social groups who are working to end systems of oppression that give them greater privilege and power based on social group membership. Becoming an ally, becoming anti-racist is a journey. There is no finite destination. So we continue to step up, we continue to go out of our comfort zones, we continue to have these discussions, and we continue to show up and be brave. In our dialogues, we were also introduced to the concept of Ubuntu, which finds its origin from the Zulu and Zola people. And Ubuntu translates to a person is a person through other persons, which confirms our connection to each other. Anda's going to speak on Dr. Ibram Kendi. Next slide.
Thank you, Carla. This morning in our call to action session, we listened and talked to about the podcast Unlocking Us, Brené Brown with Ibram Kendi, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And perhaps most of you have heard of Professor Kendi mainly as the author of the book or bestseller, How to Be an Anti-Racist, but he's also the director of the Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center at the American University. In his podcast with Brené Brown, he talks about topics like the American nightmare and the concept of neutrality, somewhere in between being a racist or an anti-racist, and the choice and meaning behind seeing others as less than or generalizing traits to an entire group. Dr. Kendi explains that the American nightmare is basically the idea that African Americans are constantly told that America is the land of equal opportunity, that everyone is treated the same, that they all have access to the American dream, and that in fact is not obviously supported by their experience. In terms of explaining the concept of neutrality, Dr. Kendi calls it a mask or a defensive mechanism. And in this podcast, what stands out the most on a different note is the idea or the concept that policies can be created and rooted in racism that end up hurting everyone and not just the specific race. And I will talk a little bit about more on this in next slide. So through this podcast, we came across another author and professor, Dr. Metzel, who conducted a 5-year research in Missouri, Tennessee, and Kansas. And he argues in his book that harboring negative feelings towards others is detrimental to people's health. Yet what hurts the most is when there are policies that are rooted in resentment towards the less fortunate. And I find this particularly interesting because it comes back to our personal values and who we are in rapport to other people. This also gives us an opportunity to reflect on our own internal thoughts when we meet individuals who are, for example, homeless, or when we, for example, review let's say a student's financial aid packet. What is your first instinct? Is it first to take as many steps as you can to help the less fortunate, or is it bringing up judgment? And so I think that books like this are, aside from being slightly controversial, they also give us the opportunity to be reflective. Now I will hand it over to Trina.
Here I am. Let's see, next slide. So as we've said, our discussions are going to grow organically, but they have and they will likely continue to center on topics like creating collective liberation, dismantling systemic racism, sharing our departmental efforts, fostering resilience, understanding trauma that students bring with them, practicing self-care and self-reflection. Because this is an action-oriented group, we work together to organize short-term and long-term action goals. So for example, from one session to the next, we'll set a challenge for ourselves, like taking the implicit bias test. We're also keeping a running list, running resource list and topic list. And we've begun to assemble these nuggets of gold we're calling See Something, Say Something guide. And sometimes it's hard in the midst of a meeting or when we're trying to have a discussion to think, when did we see an instance of racism? Because Mesa is a very elevated place, and a lot of us spend time in places where we might not feel like we hear these things, or at least from my perspective as a white person, it doesn't necessarily come to the surface that I've heard these things. But when we can talk about experiences that we've had and we can see, oh, right there, And so what we're doing is trying to assemble these to give us materials that we can talk about and kind of dive into a bit. And Carla has some additional ideas that she shared with us today.
Yeah, we are envisioning a session that will allow us to practice having difficult conversations, modeling this after exercises created by Surge, which is showing up for racial justice. Next slide.
Feel free to enter any questions in the question and answer thing, and Cloris and Lakita will share their responses with us.
I think there was actually one, and they wanted to know how they would get the link to our meetings, and I believe that comes from the loft, correct?
Yes, it comes out. I send it a couple times before each meeting, and I send it to the DLs for classified supervisors and managers.
Mm-hmm.
So if anyone else needs it, I can definitely pass it along to other groups as well.
And I believe they came in anonymous. If you want to put your name, we'll make sure to email you one specifically.
And then what would you all think about showing the video that we have? And then if people have questions, they can continue. Oh, there's another question in the Q&A.
Okay.
So this question is, how could classified professionals start speaking up when sometimes we feel we don't have agency?
I have one thought just to kick this off, and that is that since the equity agenda has come forward and the vision for success, it's clear that we can't have two systems of people in our space. Like, we all need to have agency to do our work, and we need to connect with each other as colleagues. That every single one of us in a space of excellence, every single person is empowered to help support the need that presents itself. And I don't know how the leadership feels about these words, but I do feel a strong investment on the part of any of the leaders I've communicated with, that we be able to, speak as colleagues and say something if we see something, and have good, productive, if difficult, conversations with each other as we're adjusting to kind of this new 21st century world and maybe a different role that classified might play in it. So one thought I have is that I would encourage you to see if you could have that challenging conversation with your supervisor or direct report to see how you might move forward on that.
Yeah, and if I can also add, I think when you say you don't have agency, I think you also have to remember you're still an individual with your own thoughts and ideals and experiences, right? So I think what we're saying is your perspective, your experiences, all of that can only help contribute to what our goals are, I would think. So don't forget that you're an individual, and only you can speak to your experiences. Only you can provide that input. No one can do that for you. So even if you feel like you don't have that support, you would have to sit with yourself and realize that you may have missed an opportunity to not only help yourself, but help someone else. So I think we need to be mindful of that our individual experiences, again, contribute to the learning that the environment of learning that we're in.
Great. Banny Fam, we received your email. So we have the email so that Eva can send you the link.
So I'm seeing another question. It says, so I think I have an idea of how these principles and practices look in the classroom, but classified professionals have a much broader contact with the students. How do you manifest your practices in your respective areas? Anda, you want to address that question?
Thank you, Lakita. Our office engaged in conversation from the research perspective. What is our role in advancing social justice ideas, and what can we do to help the entire campus? And I think that our using analytical brain to bring up issues that are reflected in the data and having conversation or facilitating conversation around that and bringing in practitioners' knowledge to see what can be done based on the information that is reflected in our reports.
I think another thing too, as we think about how we manifest this in our areas, is to have a better understanding of student experience coming to us. Like, we cannot discount fears that they may have or experiences of institutional trauma. And so we each develop our own practices, but one is to soften and to be very kind and loving to the people who come to us. And that's true in person or virtually. And for example, in my case, I've actually upped my game since we've been virtual, because students will submit petitions and they'll share the problems that they're having in their petitions with food insecurity, homelessness. And now I'm very intentional in my responses to them to connect them to resources, and then to recognize that the language of policies and petitions can be very harsh, and to kind of try to soften that as one practice.
Well, it looks like that's it for Q&A. Thank you so much, Trina.
Absolutely. We have a little bit of time and a gift. Do we on the committee? Okay, so we recognize that this is a very powerful speech, and we hope it's okay to leave you with it. We think it's very important in this challenging time, in a time that feels dark, perhaps, as we look forward to our election, to hear from Valerie Carr, a Sikh lawyer, filmmaker, and activist, who gave her watch night speech to many denominations on New Year's Eve in 2016.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. On Christmas Eve, 103 years ago, my grandfather waited in a dark and dank cell. He sailed by steamship across the Pacific Ocean from India to America, leaving behind colonial rule. But when he landed on American shores, immigration officials saw his dark skin, his tall turban worn as part of his Sikh faith, and saw him not as a brother, but as foreign, as suspect, threw him behind bars where he languished for months. Until a single man, a white man, a lawyer named Henry Marshall, filed a writ of habeas corpus that released him Christmas Eve, 1913. My grandfather, Kehar Singh, became a farmer, free to practice the heart of his Sikh faith, love and oneness. And so when his Japanese American neighbors were rounded up and taken to their own detention camps in the deserts of America, he went out to see them when no one else would. He looked after their farms until they returned home. He refused to stand down.
That's right.
In the aftermath of September 11th, when hate violence exploded in these United States and a man that I called uncle was murdered, I tried to stand up. I became a lawyer like the man who freed my grandfather, and I joined a generation of activists fighting detentions and deportation, surveillance and special registration, hate crimes and racial profiling. And after 15 years, with every film, with every lawsuit, with every campaign, I thought we were making the nation safer for the next generation. And then my son was born. On Christmas Eve, I watched him ceremoniously put the milk and cookies by the fire for Santa Claus. And after he went to sleep, I then drank the milk and ate the cookies. I wanted him to wake up and see them gone in the morning. I wanted him to believe in a world that was magical. But I am leaving my son a world that is more dangerous than the one that I was given. Because we are raising a brown boy in America. A brown boy who may someday wear a turban as part of his faith. And in America today, as we enter an era of enormous rage, as white nationalists hail this moment as their great awakening, as hate acts against Sikhs and our Muslim brothers and sisters are at an all-time high, I know that there will be moments, whether on the streets or in the schoolyard, where my son will be seen as foreign, as suspect, as a terrorist. Just as Black bodies are still seen as criminal. Brown bodies are still seen as illegal. Trans bodies are still seen as immoral. Indigenous bodies are still seen as savage. The bodies of women and girls seen as someone else's property. And when we see these bodies not as brothers and sisters, then it becomes easier to bully them, to rape them, to allow policies that neglect them, that incarcerate them, that kill them. Yes, Rabbi. The future is dark. On this New Year's Eve, this watch night, I close my eyes and I see the darkness of my grandfather's cell. And I can feel the spirit of ever-rising optimism in the Sikh tradition, Charlie Lieu, within him. And so the mother in me asks, what if? What if this darkness is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? What if our America... is not dead, but a country that is waiting to be born? What if the story of America is one long labor? What if all of our grandfathers and grandmothers are standing behind us now, those who survived occupation and genocide, slavery and Jim Crow, detentions and political assault? What if they're whispering in our ear today, tonight, you are brave? What if this is our nation's great transition? Does the midwife tell us to do? Breathe. And then, because if we don't push, we will die. If we don't push, our nation will die. Tonight, we will breathe. Tomorrow, we will labor in love, through love, and your revolutionary love is the magic we will show our children. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
We opened our first session with this, and we're so proud to close this session. leaving you with those thoughts. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Please join us. Our next session is on the fourth Thursday from 2 to 3. Anyone who's interested in this work and wants to ally with Classified are welcome. The announcements are sent out from the loft a couple of times before each session. Thank you.
All right. So Andy, if you can, there you go. Thank you so much. So first of all, I'm trying to collect myself. Y'all know I'm a crybaby, but anyway, we had the real gift of seeing Valley Coeur at the last, one of the last all people's breakfasts, and actually got to see Reverend William Barber as well. And so this idea was something that she talked about, and it was an absolutely powerful message about hope, right? And not just hoping, but doing while we're hoping. And so I just want to thank you all. This was spectacular, absolutely spectacular. You guys are doing fantastic work. I want to thank for just a minute, VPA Legaspi was the one who suggested we should do this today. So Lorenz, thank you for that. And to the folks that are Equity Task Force leadership, thank you so much. This is truly transformative work. And when I had the opportunity to be part of that wonderful call to action, I truly believe that when we make ourselves vulnerable to one another, we learn the most. We are learners together, and you guys are exemplifying that and moving ahead and doing this work. So thank you to all of you. And we have recorded this session. And so I imagine we're going to get some requests from folks to see this session. You guys may be going on the road soon. I don't know, but safely, of course, physically distanced with masks on after we wash our hands. But I just want to thank you. Thank you so much for leading with love, leading with fidelity, and bringing us some really wonderful learning today. I learned a lot by what I heard. You talked about some of my favorite people. There is just nobody like Bell Hooks. There's nobody like Bell Hooks. So thank you, Lakita, for that. So I just want to end by saying what I've been trying to say to folks is I am so grateful to be in this Mesa community. So grateful for all of you that are here with us today, our Classified Equity Task Force. Really grateful to the 50 or so folks that are on Zoom with us and another however many that are on YouTube with us. We need to be each other's community right now. We're not physically on campus together, and we're used to walking down the hall, or, you know, I'm used to going over and stealing a K-cup from institutional effectiveness, seeing what the researchers are up to, or, you know, stopping by somewhere on campus. And unfortunately, we don't have the chance to do that physically right now. But with what we saw today, we can certainly do it in these kinds of spaces to stay connected to each other. And it's also how we keep our students connected to us. Because even though we're tired and we're doing the work every day, imagine how our students are feeling under the exact same circumstances we're in, with, you know, either children at home or loved ones that they're caring for, illness of their own, or people that they love, losing a job, whatever it might be. And so, Trina, I so appreciate that, you know, giving grace and leaning in and calling in is what we need to do with each other, because I know that in this Mesa community, in this familia, that we are truly one. So thank you today for all of this. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. And again, thank you to our wonderful presenters today. And with that, we are going to give folks the gift of time, the one that we probably all could use most right now. So bravo, bravo. And we will see you all at our next community forum in a couple of weeks. And we will get that information out just as soon as possible so people can join us again. Bravo. Bravo. And goodbye, everybody. Stay safe, wash your hands, wear a mask, physically distance.